You're listening to WEBurlesque podcast. This is Viktor Devonne. It is January 14th, 2019, and I am speaking via satellite, more or less, to Quorra Van Tassels. Yes, where are you these days? What relative landmark would people be familiar with?
Oh, God. I mean, I actually just recently moved to Delaware, so I don't even know what to tax-free shopping?
I mean, that's a plus. That's
there
a plus. Go. What brought you to Delaware?
I'm sorry, one more time?
What brought you to Delaware?
My older sister is getting ready to have her second child, and I was recently living with her and my brother-in-law and their first kid, and I needed to find a place to move, and a friend of mine just happened to be looking for a roommate, but she lives down in Delaware, so it just kind of was a right time, right situation sort of thing, so I went there. And so this just kind of was like, well, this is a bit of a stretch as far as like how far I have to travel every day, but it's kind of the only option I have aside from like moving back in with family, which I want to try and avoid because of not wanting to be an inconvenience to anybody.
Sure.
So.
Now, I think a lot of people, if they're familiar with your work, associate you with Pennsylvania and possibly incorrectly, not incorrectly, but short-sightedly with Philadelphia.
That's fair.
Yeah, you've never lived in Philadelphia, but you have definitely worked there, as well as in New Jersey, and you've also performed in New York. Where do you originally hail from?
Originally, I'm from Pennsylvania. I have, with the exception of the brief stint of time that I lived in New York City for like an 8-month period, I've lived in Pennsylvania all my life. That it's a comfort of what I'm used to, and a lot of my family is around here or like originally was from somewhere else and have all moved here. So I think it's more for me staying nearby to what I feel comfortable with. Mm-hmm. So that's really more of what it has to do than anything. It's just a matter of my family has lived in like Upper Darby, and then we moved to Aston, and then we moved to Chadds Ford, and a lot of that had to do with like my family expanding to like me and my sisters and wanting to get into better like school districts and stuff like that. So it's really been not so much of my choice of staying in Pennsylvania until I became an adult. And then when I became an adult, it was really just more of a, well, family is nearby and I'd like to stay closer to family because I'm not fully, it's also a matter of just not knowing where else to go.
Now, did you ever have aspirations in terms of going to the West Coast or anything like that? Did you want to go into acting or try anything on that side of things?
It's funny that you should mention that because my plan is at some point, hopefully in 2020, to move to the West Coast because I want to pursue a career in voice acting.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
So,
what led you to that field?
I've always had an interest. I mean, I've had vocal training since I was little in the sense of I've been in like chorus and choir since I was in about 3rd grade. Okay. And so I've always had an interest in singing or things that have to do with like voice manipulation. And I've noticed as I've gotten older and just like hanging around casually with friends that I can like alter my voice pretty well. And I have a lot of people that I admire that do voice acting work, and I kind of want to just, I guess it's sort of one of those situations where I developed a passion for it over time, just kind of casually, and then it's become more and more of a bigger influence in my life, and it became something that I was like, I'm not looking at it as it's something I want to do for a career because maybe it'll be easy, like a lot of people seem to think it would be. I've seen, behind-the-scenes things that these people do for work, and I find it fascinating. So it's just kind of something I think that I'd have a pretty decent talent at, and I want to try my hand at and see if I can do it and like really throw myself into making a career out of it.
Were you a performing arts kid?
Not so much until I got into high school, and even then it was really like I was never like in a musical or anything like that, although I did audition to be in them. I was really more in like choir and show choir growing up, but I do think that is what kind of led me to appreciating like any type of stage time or that mentality of, hey, I like performing in front of people or performing for people because I enjoyed the reaction from people when performing. So I wasn't brought up in like a household that like really idolized the arts. I'm actually from like a family of mostly like scholars and athletes, so I'm actually kind of the odd man out in the sense that in my immediate family, especially, I'm the most artistic one.
So when did you come out as a creative, artistic person in your scholarly family?
I remember it specifically when I was in fourth grade. We had an assignment where we had to explain what we wanted to do when we got older, what we wanted to be. And I remember that at the time when I was in fourth grade, I wanted to be an illustrator, or as I refer to it, a book artist, because I wasn't fully, And I ended up drawing like the face of a character in the story that I had created in my mind. And I really enjoyed the way that I drew that, and I was really proud of it. And I remember taking it home and showing it to my parents, and I think that was the first time that they were like, "Oh, okay, this one can draw. Okay, so that's where this one's going to focus their talents and whatnot, because my older sister, I mean, as the eldest and the firstborn, like, I feel like it's almost kind of you're obligated to fall into like, something following directly what your parents did. So again, both my parents were really big athletes and also really scholarly, in my opinion. So my elder sister ended up being the more like studious, like debate team type of person. I was the, band kid and artistic person. And then my youngest sister has played every sport, known to God. So she's been the athlete.
What did you play in band?
I played the flag. I was in color guard.
How long did you do that?
I did that all throughout high school. I actually, in trying to be more like the person I thought my parents wanted me to be, I did a lot of sports when I was growing up, all the way up into high school. I did track for like literally half a year in my first year of high school, and then that somehow, some way is how I discovered marching band, and I got into it roughly sometime in the spring or so of my freshman year, and just kind of went with it from there, because it was like the first group. I had also been in Catholic school up until high school, so this was the opportunity of me, really getting to branch into a lot of those different like high school cliques and not knowing where I fell in at all. And marching band was the first place where I met people where I was like, oh, okay, this kind. I mean, it's not a perfect fit, but it's definitely a better fit than most of the other like genres of people that I've tried to associate myself with.
Yeah, it's something we have in common. We both went to Catholic school, although I started in 6th grade and went through high school. So I guess we're sort of almost the invert of you. Were you raised Catholic?
I was, and it's funny because my family used to be very much so the like go to mass every Sunday, and then it became go to mass like every other Sunday, and then it became really only going to mass on like Christmas and Easter, and I think that has more to do with the fact that as my sisters and I have gotten older, we've all kind of like branched out and developed in our own like way as far as what our religious beliefs are, and not a lot of them are exactly the same as my parents. So it's just kind of like, do you guys want to go with us to mass? Not really, because like super not down on organized religion, but thanks so much for offering. I appreciate your efforts.
Yeah, there's some good stuff in there, but there's a saying that like one can really enjoy Jesus, but his fans are rough. They're really hard to deal with sometimes.
I mean, I think that's definitely a fair statement. And kind of going back to what I was saying before, my favorite part of Mass was always just the part where we got to sing. I didn't really care. I didn't care about any of the other stuff, and I admittedly didn't pay attention to a lot of the other stuff.
Well, there's some good church music out there. A lot of it is done really badly, but some of it's quite beautiful.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I liked about it the most, is that it was what I think the part of it that I fell in love with was the fact that I just found it to be so pretty, and especially depending on the setting and like where you're at for the Mass and whatnot, it can make it like that much more of an ethereal kind of experience, and that was what I loved. But whenever you removed that aspect of it, I was like, this is just us talking or listening to someone talk for an hour about, it was the same kind of feeling that I almost had in high school history class, where it's like you're telling me the same information that I have literally heard over and over and over again, just being regurgitated in a different way. And I don't enjoy it because I already know this stuff. I don't know why I go to Catholic school for 5 days out of the week and then also have to go to this place on Sunday and hear the same stories.
When you were growing up, were you a fan of anything particularly, I don't know, not scandalous per se, but I've spoken to a few people that either were raised very religious or went through a religious school, and Hazel Tart is a good example. I had an episode with her. She talked about how she would read Harry Potter in the bathroom because her parents couldn't know. And I remember being, I was way lucky as a kid, but I became a fan of Madonna right when the Sex book came out, so that was maybe not the best time for my parents, that they weren't crazy about that. And I remember that was sort of a weird thing, being a weird person to be a fan of in about 5th, 6th grade for a lot of my colleagues. Was there anything that you were drawn to that was a little deviant, we'll say?
I honestly can't recall anything that I was interested in that was deviant. Definitely as far as my family viewed, like I was and still am super into like anime and things of that nature, and my family still does not get that and does not try to. Not deviously, but along those same lines, like just anything related to nerd culture, like comics and stuff like that. It's not that it was ever like something that I couldn't share with my family. It's something more that I chose not to share with them because, in all honesty, I've gotten teased by my family for it. So it's just become one of those, I'm not going to. And the funny part of that is that as I've gotten older, my mom has actually commented on the fact that she doesn't feel like she really knows what I'm into because I don't share anything with her. And I have to kind of bite my tongue and be like, well, the reason I don't share any of that with you is because when I was in high school and tried to do that, you kind of teased me for it, only because I assume you don't understand it. Therefore, it's kind of that mentality of, oh, I'll make fun of it because I don't understand it, and that's easier than trying to listen and figure out what exactly this weird thing is that my kid's into. But I can't. Actually, if I do think about it, when I was a teenager was when as most of us as teens, especially teens that were raised in like Catholic and Christian households, was when I first started like looking into and experimenting with like Wicca and like witchcraft and reading that sort of stuff. And so I think that was definitely something that I didn't like let my family know about because I had a feeling that it was going to, create a whole satanic panic thing in my house. So I just kept that under wraps. And it was really just more of like, hey, let me look into this stuff because I hear a lot of people that I, associate with or that I know really well talking about it. And I don't know if it's the right fit for me, but like, let me just read up on it and see what it's about. But I had a feeling that like if my mom or dad ever like saw it, they would immediately just be, grossly offended and not know what to do about it. And it would just, I as a person don't really deal well with confrontation, so I really just wanted to avoid any of that happening. So yeah, I kept that pretty under wraps. So that's probably the thing.
So you were somewhat privately nerdy. Did you have friends that you at least were able to cultivate these interests with, or were you sort of a loner as a kid?
Well, I definitely, like, later on in high school was much more social and really started to, like, have my extrovert side come out then. But when I was in Catholic school, I was honestly, like, the polar opposite of myself now. I was very introverted. I have, very vivid memories of, like, again, being in 4th grade and, like, there's people that are sitting around at lunchtime hanging out and talking with one another, and I'm off at my desk like reading a book that I've literally read 7 times already, but I'm reading it again because I don't have anyone to really talk to. And also, like, but it was almost something that I was, like, super proud of was the fact that I was like, I don't have friends, and that's totally fine because you know what? Every time that anyone else in this like group of people I know has talked about their friends. It's always them complaining about how awful they are or something that's going on. So I think I almost thought that I was better than people because I was introverted and didn't have to worry about the drama of friendship and everything like that. But yeah, it's pretty lonely. And like looking back on that now, I acknowledge the fact that that's like definitely a lonely type of childhood to have. But no, I had friends when I was in Catholic school, but a lot of them were like fair weather friends or like people that like now I have no idea what they're up to. I don't associate with them anymore. And then in high school, it was definitely more of a place where I got to cultivate really more substantial friendships that kind of shaped my personality and like the things that I'm into. Because again, like that was where marching band came in, and there were people that shared like similar interests with me. So I didn't feel like I had to try and alter the way that I was personality-wise to be able to like talk to these people. So yeah, I would say I was like a pretty like loner/lonesome kid growing up, and then in my young adult years, like end of high school into college years, was when I really actually started to like be more sociable and want to be around people more.
Yeah, I think I myself, I wouldn't have thought at the time that my childhood was lonely. But looking back, it wasn't. Maybe what lonely is the wrong word for it, because I think maybe more solitude or more interest in being alone. And even when I had friends, because I had people that I saw almost every day that I was friends with, I think that it's not a unique experience for either people who end up realizing that they are queer or trans or of different inclinations, to realize like you spent a lot of time with these people really on the surface, like you really didn't dig in, either for self-protection or because you didn't know how to phrase it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Again, that was a lot of my early years of high school, was because, I went to a Catholic school, so I even went into a public high school, and there's people that are talking about, like, all these different things. There are also, like, groups of people that have known one another since middle school and gone to high school together. So I'm like, I don't have these same memories or these same, like, relationships that you guys have built up. So I'm just going to sit here in silence because I don't feel like I can relate, and I have nothing to chime into with any of this.
I think that's one of the reasons one of the predominant reasons I got into pop culture, because it gave me something that I could talk about that wasn't personal. Because again, like I changed schools. First, I moved from Connecticut to New Jersey, and didn't know anybody, obviously. And then I moved from public school to Catholic school and didn't know anybody at 6th grade. All these people went to pre-K together. Like, it was very isolating. And I think I chose a lot of that isolation, but I think I also had, like, isolation thrust upon me.
Yeah, I think it was I can definitely agree with that. And I definitely agree with the point that you mentioned earlier, is that it wasn't so much loneliness so much as solitude. Like, I don't think it would ever dawn on me when I was by myself, like reading at home or reading at school. Like, I wasn't angry about the fact that I was being left alone to read. In my mind, I'm just like, okay, this is just something I do. This is normal.
Right. It's just your everyday. Yeah.
Yeah. I think looking back on it now as an adult, I kind of feel like, oh, that's kind of sad and a little bit lonely. But when you're a kid, and especially if you don't really know anything else outside of that, you don't think anything of it. You're just like, it's just what I do. So yeah, I agree with it. It's more solitude, chosen or otherwise, than loneliness per se.
when did you find yourself in as a conventioneer? Because I know that's how you found out about White Elephant, is you attended a couple of things. How did that all come together?
I want to say it was 2008. I had been working at Barnes & Noble, and a girl that I worked with there and I had become friends because, again, we were both very nerdy and had commiserated over a lot of like similar interests in regards to that. And she had mentioned a convention down in Baltimore called Otakon. I'd never I'd heard of conventions, but I literally knew nothing about that culture and anything to do with it. So she mentioned it, asked if I wanted to go, explained kind of what it was and like how things would be broken down and everything like that. And so that was the first anime convention that I ever attended, and I just kind of fell in love with just conventions in general. And then also, like a lot of the conventions that I think you're referring to were ones that were specific to like a genre that I had an interest in, like steampunk or again like comic
the Renaissance Fair
like
or yeah. I mean,
exactly.
That's really where White Elephant got its start, is we started performing at either indoor Renaissance Fair conventions that were prevalent in New Jersey in the mid-2000s, and then but then that stumbled into kink events, and that stumbled into goth nights, and we had I like to say that White Elephant had a very hot topic aesthetic. I mean, even but a lot of that was based on, because that was our Rocky Horror leanings.
Yeah.
So we weren't nearly as glam as the people on that screen were. We were a little rough and tumbler. So the people that when I started White Elephant with Femme Fait La Butch, that was where we were at. That already appealed to us. That's why steampunk appealed to us. That's why we liked the Dresden Dolls. It's not that we saw those niches and then applied ourselves to them. We found a place for ourselves there.
I had actually, it literally was very much so, it's funny because of shows that we've done together. It was very much so an Alice through the looking glass, or not even through the looking glass, in Wonderland sort of situation, where I was attending a convention that you guys were at, and I had seen, I think it was just that it was later on in the evening, and I was just kind of wandering the halls, seeing what was going on, not really sure what to do with myself, because I was, I wasn't really tired or anything like that. I just, I wanted to see what was happening. And I stumbled into the room where you guys were getting ready to perform. And I ended up just sitting down because I think that I may have heard the term burlesque before and was kind of curious about what exactly it entailed. So I figured, I don't have anything else, really planned going on. And, this is better than wandering up and down the halls continually just, looking over the same stuff. So, if this is going to be a show, okay, let me check this out, because if nothing else, it's going to be, an hour of my time that I can be spent doing this as opposed to just wandering around aimlessly. So I ended up going in, and I don't even remember, I want to say that it was one of the steampunk shows, but it was one where Dolly Schott did her going UFOing number. And
yes.
That was my first exposure to White Elephant, and I think that was actually the exact moment. And I think it was partially Dolly and it was partially you performing. And forgive me because I do not remember exactly the number that you had done for that show. But I think that show being the turning point for why I wanted to get into performing, and specifically why I wanted to do burlesque, was because it was the first kind, my preconceived notion of burlesque was, okay, it's going to be like girls stripping. So
sure.
When I saw you on stage, I was like, okay, guys can do this too. And then when I saw Dolly on stage, I was like, oh my God, it's a varying of body types and aesthetics as well. Holy shit, I think I want to get into this. And also, I think what drew me into it was I very much so liked what Web put out there as far as being very narrative acts that I saw, a lot of storytelling. And I found fascinating with just like the idea of like, okay, you have 3 minutes and 50 seconds, tell people a story, go. And getting to see so many different people do that without knowing anything about them, like anything about their, history, about like what kind of, skill set they have, like, are you a dancer? Are you a model? Are you an actress or actor when you're up on stage and performing burlesque? Just getting to watch them kind of go through it and getting what they were going for, I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, this is something that I want to do. Like, I specifically want to do, like, narrative storytelling through striptease. And if I am going to do it, I think these are the people that I need to reach out to about doing it, because if nothing else, maybe they can give me some pointers as to where to go if they don't have any available openings, as it were.
Yeah, you messaged me and Faye in early 2011, and then we finally got you for the Geeky Kink event in 2012. So there was a bit of a stretch of some communication, and that wasn't uncommon for us. There were a number of people who, I say this a lot, that burlesque is one of the more accessible mediums. People look at that and they both say, oh, I could never do that, but if I could do that, I would do that. So there's an interest, but it requires a follow-through, and it requires a tremendous amount of I would say persistence, because there's a lot of us, especially on this coast, especially in this tri-state area, particularly in the New York area. But what I thought was really funny, because I went back in our conversations just so I could check when you first contacted us, and you did not use the name Quorra. Do you remember how you signed your emails?
My original stage name was going to be Faye Grimoire. And I remember you telling me that there was already a Faye in the group, and I was like, motherfucker.
Well, I mean, that wasn't a requirement for you to change things.
But it was me and my middle child self being like, well, if someone else already has that name, then I have to choose a name that's going to make me stand out and be different.
Valid. Where did the name Quorra come from? Particularly that spelling.
It's funny, because a lot of people, when I tell them that it's like a nerd reference, assume that it's Quorra from the show Legend of Quorra. But it's actually, if you've ever seen the movie Tron, or Tron Legacy, the one that came out in like the 2000s or so. What is her name? Olivia Wilde's character is named Quorra, and I remember really and Quorra is also very close to my given name, so I just kind of, if we're going based off why I chose that for my stage persona name, it was because I was like, I can just use this, and then that way when someone, whether they're talking to my given name or they're talking to my stage persona, the first part of it sounds identical, so I'll know that they're talking to me.
Right.
But at the end of Tron Legacy, I think it was, the credits start rolling, and the way that Olivia Wilde's character's name is spelled was spelled the way that I spell it, the Quorra, and I was just like, oh, okay, so they pronounce it Quorra, but it's spelled with a Q. Okay, so that's different. That's interesting. Let's use that. And then Van Tassels is just because it sounded like the most burlesque thing I could think of, because it's very
like up to Northampton Van Tassels, yes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I guess Quorra was where my creativity dried up, and then I was just like, Van Tassels, there we go, that's fine.
Done.
Into it, over.
So
for me, whatever.
So walk our audience through your development of your first act that you put on stage.
Oh, goodness. I think, so my first act that I ever did with you guys was All I Do Is Dream of You, the cover by Michael Bublé. And I did it in, again, this is when I was a baby burlesquer. I knew nothing. So I would like to take this moment to throw a PSA out there to any new performers, especially new performers that have mentors or people that have stepped in and been like, hey, I'd like to coach you or like talk you through how to do this whole thing. Consider yourselves extremely lucky, because I was definitely that girl that just wore like off the rack underwear and didn't do anything to change it and make it my own, and definitely wore those pasties that look like flowers that you're really just supposed to put on underneath your shirt to make sure that your nips don't poke through as actual pasties when I first started performing. So just consider the fact that you have a world more resources and knowledge out there for you now.
But there was something so cute about that, and again, that was one of the things. Since White Elephant was a very found aesthetic, there were a couple of crafters in our group, but a lot of us were collectors and finders of objects. I mean, I myself am. I'm keeping my local Goodwill in business, but there's a certain. Yeah, but there's a certain intimacy that a lot of those conventions sort of inspired, where it sort of felt a little. I mean, there's sort of a line a lot of times you feel between a person on stage, but there's something a little bit more inviting and a little bit more casual and a little bit more accessible, and therefore maybe even a little naughtier that you're seeing someone basically just like the girl next door. It really is. It really is just like that person who isn't unapproachable, who isn't going to scoff at you or not make you feel accepted. And I think that was a major component of our success in conventions that were run by and were made for people who felt like outsiders.
Oh, yeah, and I distinctly remember even after that first show, like a lot of people coming up to all of you guys and like thanking you for performing or expressing how much they enjoyed themselves. And I feel like that's, like, I know that that's something that people experience at shows, you know, all over, but I feel like it happens way more in intimate settings where people feel like they are encouraged or can approach you, as opposed to like if someone's performing at the Slipper Room or something like that, like there's not as much of an opportunity or an encouragement to, hey, make sure you snag that person after the show to tell them how great they were doing. There's almost like this ambiance of like, when you're in this setting, like that's beneath people and it's almost too fantastic and you could never. But when it's in these more intimate settings, it's like, it's almost like you're already friends with these people, even if you're just seeing them for the first time. So you even if no one says, hey, you should do this, you feel encouraged and want to do that. Like you feel like there's this unspoken, I should go say something to them because I really enjoyed that and want them to know I enjoyed that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that can go a couple different ways. I mean, first of all, for anyone listening who is a fan or is an appreciator of what we do, keep in mind that no performer, or anyone for that matter, but no performer owes you their time. A lot of people handle their offstage time very differently than how they present themselves on stage. White Elephant is full of different people who have varying degrees of comfort with how they handle backstages and how they handle in front of the stage. But I do know that when we first began, especially, and part of that might be the Rocky Horror influence, because it was sort of like the cast members there were sort of like an elevated audience member. Is that people would look at us like, I mean, it was my first taste of stardom. Like people would look at me like I was somebody, and I really wasn't. But thank you. Was that there was this sort of friendliness about it, and this implied consent. But of course, whenever somebody says, "Okay, I'm done," you gotta respect that. You gotta understand that not everyone wants to be recognized or complimented. That's no excuse for someone to be unnecessarily rude. If you do find yourself at an opportunity and politely say, "I really liked you," if that person snidely responds with "thanks" or "I don't care" or "I don't," whatever, then consider still that that's within their rights. But I think with White Elephant, we wanted that. We wanted to feel that we were connected because it was our way of feeling part of it too.
We were all the Charlie in the boxes on the island of Misfit Toys who just desperately wanted someone to say, hey, you're doing all right. And we just wanted to be like, oh, thank you so much. we wanted someone to acknowledge our efforts because effort was put in.
Yeah.
And I mean, why do most people do anything? It's to get some type of recognition, whether it's for, of themselves to be proud of and say, hey, I did this thing, or for someone else to come along and say, hey, I'm proud that you did this thing. So
right.
For some of us, it was a lot of looking externally for that validation, I guess.
Well, I think also a lot of us were involved with variations of live-action role-playing. So this idea of being watched or being consumable, for lack of a better word, while we were entertaining ourselves. Like we had people from Ren Fair, we had people from Rocky Horror, we had people from LARPing. I mean, you were an experienced LARPer, as I recall. How did you feel going from an audience member, like, again, you're being dropped into, this is just like high school or just like grammar school, you're being dropped into a room full of very big personalities, of people who already know each other. By 2011, we had already been together for about 5 years. How did you navigate that?
It was, I don't even want to say nerve-wracking at first. It was, I was very nervous in the sense of I don't know. It wasn't even so much about people's relationships with one another, because I went into that realizing that, like, everyone has worked with one another for a long enough amount of time. And I think because I knew to expect that, like, no one was going to just necessarily, like, walk up and buddy up to me, that made it a little less daunting of an experience to go into. But I was definitely nervous more because I was like, I hope I don't say anything wrong. I don't know, like, if there's wrong or right terminology I should be using around these people. But I also really, like, I think that eventually that kind of shyness of it withered away, and I'd like to think with a relative quickness, because in being surrounded by big personalities, I was able to allow myself to express my own big personality that I did not realize was, there as much until I was around other people that were so freely kind of flinging that around. And
we were definitely flinging.
Yes. So much to be fun. But no, like, just getting to be around other people that aren't like embarrassed or ashamed in any way, shape, or form, not that they should be, to just kind of like be out there and be brazen, makes you feel like even if you didn't think that you wanted to be that kind of way, that if you do, it's okay and it's comfortable here. No, basically it was no one's going to judge you here, we're all weird kind of feeling. And so again, it was like when I discovered marching band and just being like, okay, I can kind of, like, I don't have to be as guarded around these people because they're also weird, and they'll even if they don't necessarily understand it, they'll appreciate it, I guess. Like they'll get where I'm coming from because maybe they've been in a similar situation, basically. There was that camaraderie.
Where did you fall into White Elephant? What was your aesthetic? What niche did you feel that you represented?
Oh, for the longest time, and my original tagline reflected this. I fell into the ingenue role. I fell very much so into the shy, wilting flower character that just, ends up being a little naughty and taking her clothes off. And I think that I cannot recall for the life of me. It may have been you. It may have been Lillian Buckle, oddly enough. But there's some performer that I remember listening to that had discussed about, like, falling back into comedy when they first started performing acts because that was just a comfort zone. Like, it was where they felt their wheelhouse was strongest, so they didn't necessarily tend to branch out from that until they felt more comfortable. So that's where
it's easier to give yourself permission to be goofy, I think, than to be sexy. I think comedy can be hard. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll be successful at being funny, but if you are gawkish or awkward on stage and you play it off as, I'm gawkish and awkward on stage, oh well, you're sort of giving yourself permission. It's still hard. because it's still vulnerable, but it's not necessarily. It's also, I think, a different strength to be, smoldering temptress.
Yeah, definitely. And to be fair, like, I've been doing this for, a bit now, and I still, like, I know that I still want to extend my wheelhouse more, because I don't think that I've, to quote Moulin Rouge with Nicole Kidman saying, yes, you can do, wilted flower, but can you also do smoldering temptress? Can you do bright and bubbly? Like, can
bright
you
and
do all
bubbly.
those things? Yeah, yeah, like, can you encompass all of those in a way? And I've gotten much better at being able to, like, kind of touch on some of those other personalities that you can bring out on stage, but I still almost always revert back to not necessarily the ingenue, but just the slow burn, slow movement, almost, I don't want to say classic per se, but maybe almost like neoclassical aesthetic of just, that's where I feel the most comfortable. And I think that that's kind of what I fell into, and then it just progressed from there into something that's not quite the ingenue and like the shyness that's implied with that, but definitely not full-blown smoldering temptress yet.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen you vampy before, and I remember the first time you told me you were doing something somewhat more dominant in a role. I'm pretty sure I was skeptical. I think because you're cute. And cute can be not a hindrance. It's absolutely an asset, but it can be, I'm sure you probably experience even in real life that sometimes people associate cute with either weakness or at the very least not necessarily taking you as seriously as they could.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I've definitely gotten that. Again, like just, but there was some performer that I remember talking to about that very issue where, like, we were talking about being referred to as cute, and it's like, I'm in my 30s, like, I'm not cute, like.
But still, cute can be very useful. Cute can be very lucrative. It honestly, it depends on how comfortable a skin you find it.
Mm-hmm. And to be fair, like, I don't mind being referred to as cute, much in this. I look at cute almost the same way that I look at the word fat, and I take the Lillian Bustle approach to that word, where, like, I feel like when I'm using it to describe myself, or when certain people are using it to describe me, I don't have a problem with it. It's when people that I know are using it as, like, kind of a negative or pandering descriptor that I'm like, okay, that's not cool. I'm not okay with this. So that sort of thing. So I agree with you that it has its times and its places.
Its times and its places.
Usually it's hard. But yeah, I won't pretend that I haven't used my quote unquote cute quota to get a couple drinks for free. So it's all good.
Do you like movies?
Any movies. Old movies, new movies.
bad movies,
sad movies.
I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And I'm Rachel Corky Shank.
And together we host Screen Snark, a movie podcast for movie lovers by movie lovers.
It's a podcast dedicated to the movies that are in our eyes, on our minds, and in our hearts.
Featuring guests of a wide selection of entertainment backgrounds, performers, writers, creatives.
So please join us for the casual cinema conversation every other Monday wherever you get your podcasts.
And follow us on Twitter at @screen_snark, and we'll see you at the movies. All right, we're supposed to do that bit together.
Cool.
So what was the next step? How did you continue to work your way through as a performer?
So I continued performing in shows with Web. We usually when we did them mostly in New Jersey for like the convention circuits that we were invited to, or when we would have like the Web specific present shows there. And then I want to say, I don't even remember the exact year because, again, time is
Wibbly-wobbly.
an illusion.
Yeah,
and wibbly-wobbly and all over the place. Season or cycle 2 of the Philadelphia Burlesque Battle Royale was, again, I've been Philadelphia adjacent for the longest time, and it, presented itself as a, hey, if you're new or if you're someone that's been performing for a bit but you want to maybe see if you can, like, hone in on your skills, this is an opportunity for you to maybe try that out. So I ended up entering into that competition, which was, I want to say it was I forget if it was 8 weeks or, like, 12 weeks when I was a part of it, but it was a several-week-long competition where you had to do everything from improv sessions to, and it was all themed, so it was, improv sessions, and then doing, a duet with someone, and nerdlesque and comedy and kink and all these other things, and you were given literally a week to kind of prepare for the next week's number, and it was very challenging. It was definitely one of the more stressful experiences of my performing life, just because it was really daunting tasks that were presented, and having to come up with ideas, and having to try and find that balance between, well, do I do what I think will be interesting and what I would like to do, or do I do what I think the judges will enjoy and will make them happiest? And back and forth with that. And I ended up taking second place in my my season, and runner-up to Mary Weiss, who is a phenomenal performer and drag performer who now currently is out on the West Coast, and just phenomenal, always phenomenal looks and everything. And it was, it was one of those situations where I never thought that I would make it as far as I did, and even though I didn't win, I still felt tremendous success and pride in the fact that I had done something, and not only that I had gone as far as I did, but that I stuck with it, because there were definitely weeks where I was like, I'm just going to tell them that I'm bailing out of this because I don't have anything. I don't think that like my cup has run its dry. Like there's nothing else that I can pull from.
What was the hardest challenge?
Patriotic was definitely the hardest one, and because there were some themes like that where that's really, when you say, okay, this week we're doing Kink Week, okay, like people have a very sound idea of what that means. When you say patriotic, I mean, do you mean red, white, and blue Star-Spangled Banner patriotic, or do you mean patriotic as in, hey, I have Irish heritage, Polish heritage, I'm going to do a number based on those. It was trying to figure out what do they mean and how do I interpret that. And
because you're being judged not by an audience. You actually have a panel that are voting you through every week.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
it was Drag Race ish. At least in the beginning, yeah.
Yes, very much so. It has since progressed into more of a more workshop,
more of a teaching tool,
yeah, rather than a competition, which is super interesting. And I wish that there was a way to kind of mesh the competition style and like almost not, I don't want to say cutthroatness, but that's the best way I could describe it, of the previous competition years, and then the workshop, like, we just want you to be successful aspect of it that currently exists. But, you know, that's a conversation for another, that's a whole other podcast. That's another conversation for another day.
No, I was very pleased that you did as well as you did, because I had done the first cycle and it was wrong for me, and I left it feeling unappreciated, unfulfilled, and I've since learned and taken the experience as a positive. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, like, I had so many good things also going on around that time, but that really stuck with me at the time. Mm-hmm. It was really the first time that I had fallen flat on my face, figuratively. Mm-hmm. Like, I had really bombed, and I didn't know what to do. I just didn't know what to do. Partially because I thought I was still doing good work. I thought the audience was on my side, and I'm like, I feel like I'm doing my job. But then I figured that something must be wrong with me in my perception. Mm-hmm. Not taking into account taste, regional interest. Maybe I wasn't doing my best work. Maybe I was over, because I really was doing a lot at that time, and I was not necessarily at the mindset I am now then. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe I needed to fall on my face for me to be where I am.
And also, like, experience and whatnot like that. Like, that was something that I didn't take into account was, you know, how many people I was going to compete with that were new, but mm-hmm. also how many people that I was going to compete with that were not. Because that was the other thing, is I went into this, like, not knowing what to expect, and you go into it, and there's all these people that do have experience that you're just mm-hmm. like...
Again, several who know each other. Several who know each other and have worked together before,
It's that, and it's also, I've never, like, I don't mean to be rude, but I've never heard of you, so, like, I don't really know, like, what to think of this situation. Like, should I have heard of you? Should I? Because there's people even now that I know of that have only been performing burlesque for maybe a year or two, but have mm-hmm. been, like, performing, like, you know, doing pole dancing or acting or something like that for like 10 years. So they'll say, oh, I've been performing for 10 years, and I'm just like, wait. It's like, oh, my God, am I that out of the loop that I don't know who this is? But no, it's just the fact that they've been performing, but in a different way, and that's mm-hmm. why I may not recognize them or anything like that. I always find it interesting, like, and I'm terrible with social media and whatnot in that sense of, like, I bear it all. I really do. I put it all out there for the most part. And I always find it interesting that when I make a comment in regards to something going on in the community that, like, I'm frustrated with, or that, like, I wish I was seeing more of, I'm always so surprised at people who are literally like, I didn't even realize I was still a blip on your radar, and I get messages being like, yeah, I wanted to let you know that I really thought that was a good point. And I'm just like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that I was still relevant in your circle, but I guess I am. It's just always fascinating to me because I don't know, like, and again, after this most recent cycle of TBBR, like, a lot of the newer performers have, like followed me on Instagram, or, like, we become friends on Facebook, and I'm like, not that I don't hate it by any means. It's more of I haven't really, like, gotten to associate with a lot of you, so I'm actually surprised about the fact that you want to, that I'm relevant to you, basically. So yeah, it's just always interesting to me when stuff like that pops up, and I'm just like, oh, maybe I'm not as irrelevant as I think, or maybe I have further reach than I realized, because someone out there's listening. It may be someone in Russia that I don't know super well, but someone out there's listening.
Who did you first connect with as a new artist into the Philadelphia scene, and either whether or not they were through White Elephant or that you met through other events? Who were the first people that you really, like, connected with?
Jezebel Express and Michelle Lamore were two performers where I think when I first started getting into, like, any of it, like, even when I first started working with webs, when I was doing, like, research to just kind of, like, try and get ideas, or also to try and be like, hey, I have this idea and I want to make sure no one else, like, does it, you know, because we live in that pool of, you know, nothing's original and everyone's almost done everything at this point, but everyone tries to, like, take it and put their own spin on it in a way. And I think that I had stumbled across videos of their performances, and, you know, Jezebel Express is just so very much so like, this is who I am, this is my body, and you are going to enjoy every moment of it. And then Michelle L'Amour was like the exact idea of the traditional vamp that I, like, again, as you mentioned, when I first got started, and to this day, I'm still very much so, if I'm put in any specific category, I'm cute. And so Michelle L'Amour was someone that I looked at and said, if I get to do vamp or sexy the way that this person does it, then I'll consider myself, like, successful as far as, like, that look or that persona goes. Like, if I can channel that, then I know that I've done it well. As far as, like, locally, again, when I first started performing in, like, Philadelphia and whatnot, a lot more, Masochist was actually one of the first people, and I, for the life of me, because I'm, like, terrible at this, I cannot remember how Maso and I exactly got to know one another. I think it was because...
Well, she did Battle Royale Part 3.
She did, and I think...
And she won.
Yes, and rightfully so. What it was one of the performers that was in my cycle, Ashley Arsenic, had a cabaret group called Pretty Poison, and Maso was a part of that. And through performing in my cycle of PBBR, Ashley had actually extended an offer for me to perform with their troupe, first as kind of like a guest performer and then as a more official member of it. And the troupe has since, like, fallen away and whatnot, but a lot of the people that were in it still perform, and Maso was one of them, and so that's how she and I got to know one another. That's actually where Lady Baphomet and I got to know one another, was through her as well. So I want to say that if there was anyone that I initially took, like, a kindred spirit kind of shining to when I was first starting to perform in Philadelphia, it was Maso. It was just, you know, not even necessarily, it was just, like, it wasn't nerdiness necessarily, it was more just, like, similar senses of humor that kind of just picked up on one another.
It can be a fairly, ironically, another solitary experience being a burlesque performer, even in a troupe, because you are so focused on your own work. It's your own paper. Yeah. And the work often is individualized. I mean, White Elephant did a lot of duets, did a lot of group numbers, did a lot of theme shows where we intersected.
Yeah.
But the individual work was prominent.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, like you had said, I think when you're a part of a troupe, you're so enthusiastic about the idea of community or a group, but you're still also focused on, well, even if I do a group number, how do I make myself stand out as an individual in that group? Because I know how to stand out as an individual when I'm doing my own number that's part of a show. But when we have to do the big group number as the finale, how do I still have people remember me amongst everyone else that's up on that stage at that time? So yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying about it almost being a very Solitude experience in and of itself.
It's interesting to sort of finagle it. And also in the production of it, it can be sort of isolating because you're saying no to your friends at a certain point. Something very personal about burlesque and sort of feeling, I can look at it objectively and I can tell you if I feel you're telling me a story, but I don't want to tell you that you're not good at it. Because I don't even know if I objectively really know what it means. Because I've had people objectively tell me that I'm not doing burlesque. And that's all well and good, but I'm busy. it can be sort of difficult. It can be sort of it can feel sort of private as well to be a producer, which you experienced a little bit of. I know that you had a troupe for a bit. Do you feel that you would go back into production?
I mean, I have several ideas for shows that I would like to do, so I would like to be a producer in that sense. But I'm a part of White Elephant, and I've actually recently been asked to be a part of the core troupe for Rum Runner Review, which is actually based down in Delaware, and it is run by Mark Desade. I always mess it up, and Vixen Vicious, who is not only my best friend, but also a phenomenal fellow performer. And since we're talking about like people that I feel like a kindred, spirit to, she's definitely a top contender. And also won her cycle of PBBR. So I tend to feel kindred spirits with a lot of queens, apparently. So I don't know what that says about me, but I can't imagine it's a bad thing.
No, you're keeping good company.
Yeah. So I'm not necessarily, oddly enough, as an Aries, I'm not necessarily good at taking that leadership role. Much of the same way of what you're talking about, where I can guide people, I can direct people, I feel comfortable doing that. But when it comes to the part where I'd have to tell someone no, or you're not doing that right, or I don't like that, it goes back into the whole wanting to avoid confrontation thing, where I'm just like, that part of it I don't want to have anything to do with. So what I'd rather do is be a part of a troupe where I can go to the person who is producing and say, hey, I have this idea for like a number or a group number. Let me run it by you, and we'll kind of go from there, so that someone else is being the ultimate decision maker, but is still willing to listen to what I have to say. But like producing like one-off shows, I have no problem with doing that, assuming that I, have the ability to afford to pay my performers, because, you got to do that. You got pay your artists, everyone. Whatever artist they may be, just pay them. I was so hungry. But yeah, like I produced a show back right around the time of the election between Trump and Clinton, called Nasty Women. And it was a show that was basically about like different women throughout history, or like current history, or like way, long since past history. And it was just kind of meant to be like a celebration of, women or feminine identifying persons, just because at that time in the country it was such a big thing politically, and so many people that identify that way were feeling attacked, or like they didn't have a place to go. Mm-hmm. And it felt really, rewarding to be able to put that show together and create that kind of space for people and whatnot. But, it was one of those things that I had to do as a co-production, so that I was actually able to make sure, okay, that I can afford, a door person and a sound person and the performers themselves and everything like that. So until I feel like I could safely and securely do that again, I don't necessarily know that I would produce another show. But I have ideas, so many ideas of stuff that I want to do. So we'll see how that kind of pans out.
Well, excellent. I look forward to seeing what's next for you. Mm-hmm. And as you continue on, is there anything that you've got going on that you want to put out there before we call it a day?
On January 25th down in Delaware, and I realize that a lot of people that might be listening to this are just like, I don't even know where that is, because it's Delaware. But,
yeah. No, we have far-reaching. This is the Internet.
That's true. Well, for anyone out there that's like, near Delaware, where whatever that may mean to you, Bar 13 on January 25th is holding their show Flashback, which is a tribute to the 1980s and 1990s, and I will be performing in that as a certain red-hatted vixen that, goes around the world and pilfers things. So, I'll just leave it at that for you. And then the next show that I have after that will be with Rum Runner Review. It'll be their first show of 2019, and that'll be sometime in March, where we're doing kind of like a classic sort of thing. So, come out, join us, get zhuzhed up. It'll be great.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Quorra. And until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Mwah.
Mwah.
Hi, this is Viktor Devonne. Thank you so much for listening to Season 2 of WEBurlesque, the podcast. Special thank you to our Patreon supporters. That is Rob, Stormageddon, Kelly, Joseph, and Michelle. If you would like to support us via Patreon, you can go to the patreon.com/WeBurlesque. It is also in the footnotes of this episode. And you can also find us on any of your favorite podcast programs. If you can, please rate and review us there. It does help us out. It shows us in the search results of all of these places. It allows us to be seen. And if you also feel like it, you can go to WeBurlesque.com/shop, that's SHOP, and you can support us that way as well. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.